Welcome to this week's Distinguished Innovator Lecture Series. So today it's my pleasure to introduce to you Heather Franzese, who is the Executive Director and co-founder or founder and leads World Good Solutions. It was formerly World Good Development Organization. It's based here in Oakland. And it's a social enterprise, and it's well known for its mobile application, for its, I guess, famous mobile application, which is a tool that provides a voice to 18,000 low-wage workers across 6 countries. This particular application / tool was shortlisted for mobile. For the Global Mobile Award of Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, and no doubt you'll hear more about both World Good Solutions as well as the tool and so forth shortly. But I wanted to say something also about Heather's background. Heather brings a decade, a decade worth of experience with social entrepreneurship. And this is a topic that we haven't covered a lot in the lecture series before, so it's kind of like wide open new space, and I'm really happy about that. She's been previously with Fair Trade, which enables sustainable development by certifying fair trade products. She's raised $4 million in social impact philanthropy, and she launched the Fair Trade USA's Fair Trade Certified Apparel and Linens program. And she's even been with the Peace Corps. She's got I think that goes along with the whole social angle there. And she holds a master's degree from Harvard's Kennedy School, and really, I think this lecture is really important part of the whole sequence here because it brings this rich and important view of social entrepreneurship to our series. So with that, Heather, thank you for joining us and presenting.
Thank you, Professor Sidhu. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Heather Franzese. I'm the Executive Director of Good World Solutions. As Professor Sidhu pointed out, I have a background that is not in technology, so that's my first confession. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a technical person at all. I happen to run a nonprofit that uses technology for social good, but my background is completely non-technical. In fact, I'm also a sort of reluctant entrepreneur. So, thinking about the letters in the Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology, I have neither entrepreneurship or technology really nailed. But if you looked at my my CV, my resume, you would say I'm a bit of a do-gooder. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I've spent most of my career working in nonprofit. And sort of fell into this technology space. But I've found that there's just incredible opportunity right now, and living especially in the Bay Area, and even here today at the Sky Deck, I was walking around and seeing some of the companies that are here. There's so much innovation, and there's so much opportunity to use technology for good, not just to make money or keep in touch with your friends. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And I guess, so as not to bury the lead, I've been advised that we also have internships available at my organization. So I have position descriptions up here for a technical position that we're hiring for and internships. So if you're interested in that, come talk to me afterwards. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of share today, and some reflections on my career through the lens of the lean startup philosophy. How many of you have read this book? Okay, wow, not too many. How many of you are familiar with the philosophy in general? Okay, a few. So basically, Eric Ries developed this philosophy about the successful way to start a business that quickly gets feedback from the market. So it used to be everyone's approach to, kind of hole up and develop a product and wait until it was really perfected and then put it out in the market and see what happens. And he realized that actually the better thing to do, especially if you're thinking about technology startups that may require, that you rely on either business demand or consumer demand, that you need to know what the feedback is before you spend, millions of dollars developing a product that maybe nobody actually wants. So the philosophy that he outlines in here is 3 basic steps. He talks about building. So you start with, you have some ideas of a product that you want to make, and so you build it. And then you have this product and you go test it and you measure how it's doing. And then through that measurement, you get some data and you learn from that. And then you kind of go back to the drawing board. Maybe you have to build something totally different, or maybe you just need to iterate. And those are kind of the 2 different options here. You can iterate, adapting what you've already built, or what he calls pivot, which is changing entirely. So I wanted to share kind of through that framework some reflections on my career and things I've learned along the way, kind of applying that philosophy to different steps in my career. Because I get questions when I present to students. I get questions a lot of like, well, should I go down this path or should I go down that path? And I think there's no wrong answer. And you can think about your career as a lean startup and actually apply these principles. So thinking about it, just looking back on kind of my experience, when I was starting out, I lived in Chicago, so a lot of my fellow university students were pre-med, they were engineers, they were going into management consulting, and I wanted to work in nonprofit. And the Career Center was like, nonprofit? Red Cross? They were like, do you want to work at the Red Cross? And I was like, well, I guess directionally, that's yep, that's a nonprofit. Okay, I'll try that. So I did an internship at the Red Cross and helped them reintroduce blood services, so blood donor services in Chicago, and I was doing analyzing data from customer satisfaction surveys of people that took swim lessons and first aid classes through the Red Cross. So it was interesting enough, but I learned. So I was built the smallest sort of unit of measurement of a career is an internship, right? So that was my first step, is get an internship. Then I measured. What was I measuring? My job satisfaction, basically, of trying out this kind of work. And what I learned is that, one, I didn't want to sit in an office and crunch data. I wanted to do something more exotic and interesting than that. And the second thing that I learned is I didn't really want to work for an organization that was a 130-year-old organization that was really established and kind of set in its way of doing business. I wanted something more innovative. So I started looking at what else is out there. So then I'm back to the drawing board of, okay, what else can I build in this career of mine? And I went to an informational session on the Peace Corps. And they said, our slogan is, the toughest job you'll ever love. And then I heard, sort of unofficially, the slogan is, the longest vacation you'll ever complain about. So I thought, well, sign me up. This sounds good. Sounds adventurous, risky, fun. Good. I'm all for it. So then I build this sort of life for myself in Mali, in West Africa. Not Malawi, not Maui, unfortunately. So I'm living in a mud brick house for 2 years in a small village with no electricity and no running water. And one of the things that I realized very quickly, or saw very quickly, was this big communication gap that I was living with subsistence farmers. They were growing crops. They didn't have access to the market. They didn't have information about what was going on in the world. They listened to the radio and they understood about current events, but they didn't have access to the internet. And at the time, folks working at USAID there had this idea to put desktop computers in every village, and there was a lot of debate about whether that was a good idea. But it was clear that there was a big communications gap. And the other thing that I learned was that in addition to this communication gap, that people needed to be kind of in charge of their own development. So I'll give you an example. There was a clean water system in the village. It had 6 outlets, and it was run by solar panels. And this Dutch NGO had installed this solar panels and clean water system in the village in the mid-'80s. And there was supposed to be a maintenance fund for when the solar panels would inevitably break 15 years later. But nobody ever set up that maintenance fund. So while I was there, when I got there, there was clean water. And then at some point when I was there, one day the clean water just stopped because the solar panels broke. So, I thought, well, if it was somebody's job, if there was an entrepreneur in the village whose job it was to maintain the water system, and he got paid, a couple pennies a bucket for the water that he was dispensing, then he would have the funds to fix the solar panels. So, I was on this journey of learning, and so I followed along that path. I went to work in nonprofit when I came back from the Peace Corps. And, I'll spare you the details of every sort of step along the way, but, I got interested in market-based models for international development. I got interested in the power of companies to affect change and social impact. And so I went to grad school and studied corporate social responsibility. And then I thought, well, if I really want to affect change on a large scale using the power of companies, I should go work for some companies. So I went and worked at a PR agency in Times Square in New York. I worked at a toy company that was trying to figure out how to source responsibly in China. And I worked for a sportswear company in the Northwest that, in addition to making clothing and footwear, they were making bikes and tents and all kinds of outdoor gear. And I luckily had the opportunity to travel to Asia, to the factories where all that stuff was being made, and see how it's being made, and learn, firsthand, how the clothes that you're wearing and the electronics that you use and how all this stuff is made. And there again, I saw this really interesting communication gap. So similar to what I had seen with the farmers in Mali, that workers, thousands of workers are in factories every day in China and Sri Lanka and Pakistan making our stuff, and they're very disconnected from the companies here that are buying and selling those products, and certainly very disconnected from us. We have no information about their daily working conditions, and maybe we don't care, although without, I guess, them, you would be very undercaffeinated and naked. So you should care a little bit, right, of what their lives are like. So I was interested in, I became interested in whether technology could help us close this gap. And companies are certainly interested. Their way of sort of understanding factory working conditions is sending auditors to the factory to check up on and interview workers and look at payroll records and walk around the factory and take a look. Does it look safe and things like that? But the auditors are there maybe one day a year. So what's happening the other 364 days, is anybody's guess. So when I was working there and I was traveling to factories, I wasn't in a position to really solve the problem at that time. But then several years down the road, I discovered I was working on another sort of venture that was my first, I guess, try at entrepreneurship. And I should say, actually, what I learned in the corporate space, going back to the sort of, build, measure, learn, what I learned in the corporate space is that I wasn't really cut out for it, in the sense that there's a lot, especially at large companies, there's a big division of labor, right? You're doing a very specialized job. You don't have necessarily the opportunity to drive strategy, at least if you're not at the senior level. And you may not have a lot of autonomy or responsibility. And I wanted those things. So I I pivoted. I came back to the nonprofit world and had an opportunity to start and run my own program, which Professor Sidhu referred to, which was developing certification for fair trade clothing. So this was my first go at being an entrepreneur. I mean, it was in the, in an existing organization, but it was kind of its own program and a pretty new thing. And I failed. I failed pretty badly in a lot of ways. I mean, the program is still going on, and actually now it's succeeding, but it was 2009. The economy was, in bad shape. Companies were not ready to talk to consumers about how ethically their clothing was made, and we just, I wasn't hitting my numbers, and the demand just wasn't there. So thankfully, I didn't give up on the idea of entrepreneurship. But around that same time, I met these folks. There were two people here in a tiny office in Berkeley working on this cool idea, which was using mobile, the power of mobile, to connect with workers around the world. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. So I joined up with them, and we formed what's now Good World Solutions and the product LaborLink to do just that. So we started at the top of the cycle again, not just for career steps, but in this case for an actual product. So we said, okay, what do we want to do? We want to connect companies with the workers that are making their products. So let's build something. We want it to be the minimum viable product. Eric Ries talks about the simplest thing that you can build that will enable you to test your hypotheses. So that's called a minimum viable product. So in our case, that was a basic SMS application and some basic business intelligence software to visualize the data, to help us analyze and visualize the data. And so we went out into the field in Peru and started testing this with a supply chain that was making sweaters. So it was, there were women in a kind of central factory, and then some of them were also working out of their homes. So they were remote, they were difficult to reach. The company that was buying their products really wanted to know what their living and working conditions were like, but because they were in these tiny remote workshops, it was very hard to reach them. So we developed a survey about their working conditions, and then handed out these little instruction cards. We developed this, this is in English, but we handed them out in Spanish. And there's on the back instructions on how they call into our survey. So I mentioned that we started out with SMS. So that was failure number one. And what we were measuring, so we built the basic application and we wanted to measure what our response rate's like, because if nobody responds to the survey, then the whole thing is useless. What's their engagement with the platform, and how is the whole thing working? So, we're measuring these things, and we quickly found that SMS was not the way to go. Because one, response rates were low, partly because of literacy rates being low. And especially in Peru, there's a gender difference in literacy rates. So women have lower literacy rates than men. They generally have lower access to education. And so that was going to skew our data, and that was no good. The second thing that we were measuring that SMS was no good for was completion rates. So if you imagine a 10-question survey and you're trying to get someone to answer it by SMS, that's 20 messages, because you have to go back and forth asking each question and then getting a response. So we couldn't get people to finish the surveys. And then the cost, we wanted to make it free to the workers because they have very limited mobile credit on their phones and they need it to call their loved ones, or for essential calls. So we needed to make it free, and we couldn't figure out a way to make SMS free. So we had to go back to the drawing board, and we iterated to a different technology to engage with the workers. We switched to voice. So we now use a voice-based system, which is like when you call the bank and they say press 1 for English, press 2 for Spanish, and then you answer with your touch tone keypad. So we hand out these little instruction cards, and we do visual training too, to address the literacy rates issue. And what we've instituted to make it free to the respondents is a callback system. So it's pretty common in a lot of countries. We don't do it that much here, but it's pretty common in a lot of countries to actually call someone, let it ring a couple times and hang up, and then they'll know to call you back. So that's what we do, but it's automated. So they place a missed call to this local number, and then our system automatically calls them back. And when they get that call back, they hear a series of 10 to 12 voice recorded questions in their local language about their working conditions and livelihoods. And then we analyze and visualize that information. Uh-oh, it's asking me for a password. I was just going to show that.
All right, I tell you, it's just 1, 2, 3.
Oh, now you have to change it. Okay. So
Someone else made it again.
Very secure. Very secure. So this is our landing page where we analyze and visualize the data. And again, thinking through the minimum viable product lens, we still use an off-the-shelf business intelligence software. We're not, we're creating these visualizations, but not really from, we're not creating our own infographics from scratch. Partly because we can't afford engineers, with folks working at Facebook and Google here and making easy 6-figure salaries, we can't compete with that as a nonprofit. So, we cobble together off-the-shelf technology wherever we can. So this is an example of how we visualize the data for our partners. And when I say partners, I mean companies like Cisco or Disney that want to know what's happening in their factories overseas. So they contract us to capture this data, and we analyze it for them and pull out actionable information on the side there.
Take us through what that kind of means.
Yeah. So we've asked, in this example, we've asked questions about their wages and their work week, because we're trying to understand if they're working excessive hours, because the company has a code of conduct which requires workers to not exceed a certain number of hours per week. And we've also asked questions in this instance about whether children are helping with work. So we want to understand, the risk of child labor in the supply chain. Oh, well, and we had an unexpected error. I think it's my system. This is what you get when you use off-the-shelf software. So you can see we pull out the analysis on the right-hand side, and can't see because it's got the error message now. But basically, we have these slider bars for demographic factors like age. Maybe. Let's see. Maybe. So the way that the slider bars work is you can, they're dynamic, and you can click and see how people responded differently, how men and women responded differently, or how people in different age brackets responded differently. So, and then we generate PDF reports as well for our partners for them to easily share this information internally at their companies or externally with key stakeholders, because we're not just capturing the data for the sake of it. We're collecting this information because we want companies to align their business practices and their buying practices with worker needs. So we try to really package the information in a way that it is actionable for them, and we'll make clear recommendations about, let's say, if we see high-risk issues like excessive overtime or sexual harassment, we may recommend training, or that the brand intervene and push the supplier to commit to certain follow-up actions. Or if there's a gap in worker understanding, maybe workers are not aware of how their wages are calculated, or they're not aware of certain government services that are available to them. We can recommend training, but also it's a two-way system. So in addition to capturing information from workers, we also push educational information to them directly to their own phones. And we can do that either through voice recorded messages, or if the literacy rates support it, through SMS. So we have this dynamic system, and we've got some, in a few short years, we've been able to extend surveys reaching over 80,000 workers in 12 countries. So that's been a lot of measuring and learning and iterating along the way. Yes.
A combination question. One, that text on the right,
Yeah.
was that I want to ask both questions so
Yeah.
that you can do it simultaneously. One, was that generated by your software, or did someone actually go and pull that out? And two, right above it, it says request for report. Does that mean that you have a report that you sell on top? In other words, is this like everyone can get this part for free or something like that? Can you explain the model that works with?
Yeah, we're still experimenting with the different features. The analysis is custom. Because the surveys have been custom up to this point, we've allowed all our partners to decide what they want to ask, and we advise them based on our survey design principles that we've learned through testing. But we're just getting to the point now where we're doing more standardized surveys so that then we can offer benchmarking data that gives context to their information. Because otherwise they look at their own data and they're like, well, does that seem high or low? Is 60% good? You don't always know. So it's good to have that benchmarking data. So we're moving towards standardized surveys. But the request report is actually in support of the lean startup methodology. Is to help us get feedback. So what they can do is we'll usually have a standardized report that we would generate, but request report enables them to give us feedback on if they wanted a more customized report, maybe for a specific audience, or emphasizing certain data or correlations among different questions. So sometimes the analysis process is iterative. But, I should mention, related to that, we have a very high-touch business model. We're like SurveyMonkey for people without access to the internet, but we're very different from SurveyMonkey in the sense that they have a very self-service model. So anyone can go on SurveyMonkey, any monkey can go on SurveyMonkey and design their own survey. And sometimes it's garbage in, garbage out. I mean, I think they have suggested surveys, but we've found that especially because this is a new space, we don't want to poison the well by people creating bad surveys and then collecting bad data, and that would affect our reputation. So it's a very high-touch, high-service model, full-service model right now. But we're looking at ways that we could potentially automate and make it more self-service without compromising the quality of the data and the outcomes. And I should say on business model too, we're a little bit like Facebook in that we're a two-sided platform, right? One of our customers, the companies, are paying for the service and the data collection, and the other user base, which is the workers or farmers, are not paying anything. In fact, they're sometimes getting paid. So we offer incentives to our respondents. And we usually deliver that in the form of mobile credit directly to their phones, not to everyone that responds, but to a percentage of respondents. So they get excited about the possibility that they could win a prize. And we're clear about that, in our instruction materials as well, that, participate in this survey, you can win a prize. It's like when you get an email that says you're going to win an iPad for doing a customer satisfaction survey or something. So we offer incentives to motivate high response rates. And we've gotten very high response rates. We usually average about 40%, which is incredible because, if you look at standard market research, they're lucky sometimes to get 2%, or polling data, 2 to 5%. So we get about 40% response rates, and we deliberately oversample because of that educational component that I was talking about. That the more phone numbers that we capture, then the more people that we can push educational information out to. Yeah.
Do you think that there's any bias, or do you worry about the people who respond? That if they don't respond in a positive way, that something might happen to them. If they say, I'm not getting paid much and I'm working all the time, do you think there's any bias built in because of some retribution that might happen to them?
We definitely check the validity of the data. We do post-survey evaluation, speaking with people that did respond and people that did not respond to surveys, trying to understand for those that did not, why not, and what's the selection bias there. But also, compared to social audits that companies do now, where workers are being interviewed face to face and their manager can potentially see them, they're coached on what to say to auditors, there's huge fear of retaliation there. And this is giving them a totally anonymous channel. They can call into the survey anytime, anywhere. They do it when they're not at work, so nobody can see them, hear them, and they know that we're getting a good population of respondents, so there's no way to trace the information to them.
As long as they believe that it's truly anonymous.
Yeah. Well, and they don't give their names or anything. I mean, but we do capture their phone numbers, and they know that. So that's why the training component is essential. We send trainers to the factories to explain to workers what it's about, so that they trust us. And they explain that we're a nonprofit. We don't share their phone numbers with anyone. We definitely need to build that trust. In some places more than others. So, we just started working in Bangladesh in October. In fact, the day after tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary of the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh last year, where 1,100 workers were killed. And the reason that they were killed very needlessly was that they were invisible. These workers saw cracks in the walls of the factory several days before the factory collapsed, but they had no channel to report that they were working in unsafe conditions, at least no channel to report it to decision makers. Of course, they told the factory management that they were uncomfortable coming to work when the building seemed unsafe, but they had no way to connect directly with the brands that were making products there. And so we actually, you may have heard of, there are a couple different initiatives that have sprung up in the wake of that tragedy to try to address worker safety issues in Bangladesh. And one of them is called the Alliance for Bangladesh Worker Safety. It's 26 companies, including Gap, Walmart, and Target, that have come together to address this issue and pool their resources. And it's kind of a historic initiative. And so we were selected as the technology backend for their worker helpline. So we'll be rolling out LaborLink in over 200 factories in the next 18 to 24 months, giving voice to 500,000 workers just in Bangladesh. So it's pretty exciting, to have these kinds of opportunities to partner with companies. And at least in the apparel and electronics sectors right now, companies see a need because they're under a lot of scrutiny for poor working conditions. Yeah. Did you have another question or not? Okay. So that's basically it on the platform. And I'm happy to answer more questions about that. But coming back to kind of the career thoughts, I would just say think about what is important to you. I mentioned some aspects of corporate work versus nonprofit, of having, a lot of autonomy and responsibility versus, having a very focused job. I've found that for me, I like working at smaller organizations. You have to think about how much is money important to you, or would you rather have the fulfillment of feeling like you're doing something meaningful and good? Or maybe you can make a lot of money and then start a foundation and give it away. There's a lot of different ways to skin the cat. And I'm sure Professor Sidhu wouldn't like me to say that it doesn't really matter what you do. But, I think to a certain extent that's true if you follow this philosophy of always sort of testing and learning what...
Perfectly fine with that.
Okay. Testing and learning and learning to know yourself and the contribution that you want to make. I feel like that's been successful in my career. It's been successful for my organization, and hopefully if you follow that philosophy, it will be successful for you too. So I'd love to answer any questions you guys have. And like I said, we have internships available too. Thanks.
We got one question over there.
Yeah.
Just repeat the question.
So when you started your organization, what were your expectations of how much survey results you would get, and then as you've gone on through developing the company, how have your expectations changed? Like, have they gone up or have they gone down? Have you adjusted?
Yeah, it's hard to know. And Eric Ries talks about this in Lean Startup. You're not really testing unless you set a goal at the beginning, because otherwise then whatever you get seems like, oh, it's good, we got 20%, so I think we thought we would get, in the beginning, we thought we would get 50% response rates, and we have, in some surveys, we get as high as 70 or 80%. Really depends on how the workplace is set up and who's doing the training and different elements of that. We see response rates range between 20 and 80%. And we keep monitoring, and I guess over time expectations do go down a little bit because you're averaging over so much more variation across different countries and different types of workplaces. But then we set standards in different areas. So like on the technology front, we've sort of, like I said, cobbled together different off-the-shelf things instead of creating new technology. But now we need to figure out how to automate, because a totally full-service business model is very expensive and less scalable. So we're always kind of changing our assumptions or things that we're testing. Yeah.
So you said you kind of got together with two people who were in Berkeley when you started. I'm just curious if they're still around and how that interaction is.
Yeah, so we are actually carrying forward, the question for the video is the two people that were involved originally, are they still involved? So we're carrying forward the legacy of what was another nonprofit called World of Good, and they were a hybrid social enterprise focused on artisan products, the for-profit side of it, and it was started by Cal and Stanford grads, Priya Haji and Siddharth Sanghvi. And they had an e-commerce platform to buy and sell artisan products from around the world. And then they had a nonprofit side of the business that was developing technology solutions to support those artisans. So they developed this cool tool called the Fair Wage Guide that we still maintain. That's a free online resource. And then they started to, Audrey Seagraves was the woman that was managing the work at the time. They started to test this idea of labor link. They were calling it at the time SMS labor link because they thought that SMS would be the way. And then we had to ditch the SMS part because we stopped using SMS. But so Audrey is still on our advisory board. She actually works on the mobile solutions team at USAID. And then Tom Rausch, my co-founder, is still our product manager, and he manages the platform as well as all the field implementation of LaborLink in the field. Yeah, so they're still involved.
I have another follow-up question.
Yeah.
Unless someone else. When we talked, what was also is kind of interesting is, this feels so good, but you're also partnering with companies that maybe don't feel so good. So it's kind of interesting to hear about some of the companies that you're partnering with and how that how you interact with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Disney is an interesting example as one of our corporate partners, because a lot of people think of Disney's media business, and of course they have a big consumer products division as well that in its own, it's in itself is a $4 billion business for their theme parks and resorts of like licensed character products. And what they've found is they analyzed their business model, their sourcing model, and said, we want to be able to have an impact on working conditions globally because we're a massive company, but we have a licensing business model and we don't have much control actually over the factories that are chosen to make our products because our licensees choose the factories. So, and we have 20,000 suppliers worldwide that are making some kind of Disney product. So it's just massive. And so what they said is, what we're going to do is start a supply chain investment program and fund nonprofits that are doing transformative, innovative work, testing new solutions in the supply chain, and support that work, whether it touches Disney's supply chain or not, because we can't necessarily, recruit all our suppliers to get them involved in taking on or being involved in this innovative work, but we can fund other organizations and companies to be involved in it. So we're working on 2 projects that are funded by Disney's supply chain investment program. One of them is in Brazil in partnership with Social Accountability International. and a consultancy called Rapid Results Institute, and they have this innovative framework of 100-day projects to improve a specific aspect of health and safety in the factory. So they're bringing together teams of workers and managers and setting a specific goal to improve health and safety, and then we're doing labor link surveys before and after, and then even 2 months after the 100 days to see if there's lasting impact and to see if the impact is broad-based, that there's a ripple effect to the entire workforce and not just the few workers involved in the smaller project. So that's one of the programs, and then the other one is working with Business for Social Responsibility. They're a corporate responsibility membership organization based, or they have an office here in San Francisco, and they are implementing this really innovative financial literacy program. So they've seen the gap of factory workers without bank accounts and without access to formal financial services, and so they designed a training curriculum around financial inclusion. And we've designed surveys, again, to run as a baseline and during the course of the financial literacy training so that those trainers can get real-time feedback on whether their curriculum and whether their message is actually reaching the workers. So, if they're explaining to workers the value of opening a bank account or the value of savings, then we're delivering anonymous surveys to those workers to see if their knowledge base is changing or if their behavior is actually changing. Because if not, then the trainers can get that feedback and actually try to adjust the training curriculum. And then we're doing impact assessment at the end as well. And Disney's funding all of that. Yeah.
What is the danger of repercussions now, since it's anonymous, maybe not individually, but as to people, if the workers, if the surveys come out negatively, and how often do companies hire you to do like a before and after survey?
Yeah. So the fear of retaliation question, we're sort of monitoring that and very sensitive to, even though individual workers can't be targeted, could the whole workforce be coached in the same way that they're coached how to respond to social auditors? And I think the key to that is taking a partnership approach with the suppliers. So we're not trying to, catch suppliers or go around their head. We actually try to be transparent with the suppliers and say, this is the information we're trying to measure. And we even give them an opportunity to add questions to the surveys so that they're getting something valuable back from it. So I'll give you an example. In China, turnover is very high. At some factories, it's over 10% a month. So in a single year, their entire workforce is turning over. So that's huge cost in terms of training and recruitment. And whether factories are measuring that cost or not, it's a huge cost, and they know it. So if we can ask questions and help them automate their workforce communication to help them get at the root of why are their workers leaving, or what programs or benefits would their workers want to see that would make them stay, that would increase loyalty. So we take a partnership approach with suppliers so that they're getting valuable information so that they don't have an incentive to try to retaliate against workers. Yeah.
So have you noticed, because this is, the reports are sort of targeted towards these large companies that want to improve their supply chain. So I'm curious to know, since you mentioned that analysis is customized, whether there were any trends in certain criteria that multiple companies like to ask for, or certain metrics that tend to be improving, or given all this data that you've collected, I was curious as to what your prospect of the future was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this year it's a big priority for us to start to publish country and sector level data by topics that we see companies really caring about. So I mentioned standardized surveys. So one that we've created is around worker management communication. That's a big theme because what a lot of companies have found is that you can look at symptoms of bad working conditions, but the underlying root causes are weak management systems, poor communication between workers and managers. So we're starting to get a good volume of data on those issues and seeing how it's tracking over time. Worker health and safety, working hours, Those are hot button issues for companies, and we'll see. We're just starting to get to that volume of data that we can not only track trends over time, but I hope begin to use LaborLink as an early warning system and use it predictively, because companies are so used to looking at what happened yesterday or what's happening today, but they don't really have the sophisticated analytics to begin to predict what is going to happen tomorrow. And I will tell you, any company that we work with would pay a lot of money to know before the strike is happening in Cambodia that it's about to happen. And you can see that if you're tracking worker, if you're getting regular worker feedback, you should be able to see that agitation and know that, you should be able to see those patterns in the data. So we hope to be able to surface that. Yeah.
In the beginning, how did you get companies to adopt your product? Like, were you trying to sell it to them, or were they actually coming to you, or how did you market and get traction?
We started with a couple very progressive companies that were just interested in innovative strategies. We didn't necessarily go for really big companies at first. We wanted companies that shared our values. So Eileen Fisher, the women's clothing brand in New York, is a great example. They really talk about women's empowerment and human rights, and we felt that they, would be willing to go along for the ride as we're measuring and learning and testing, even if it doesn't really work out in the beginning, and they have come along for the ride. And then through those case studies that we build of companies using it successfully, bigger and bigger companies, feel that it makes sense for them as well. But to your earlier question as well about how do we ensure that workers are not, the data is meaningful. We have to kind of screen our partners. We don't want to work with just anybody, because if we don't feel that they have an authentic intention to do something with the data, then we're wasting our time, we're wasting the workers' time, and then we might as well be just a for-profit market research company. Yeah.
How often do you find like the big companies like Target, Walmart, and the like are actually they don't own the manufacturing resources, right? They're contract manufacturers that they are giving their needs to, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Very few companies own factories.
Own their own factories.
Yeah.
So do you help them, I guess, get feedback on various contract manufacturers, and then they can maybe be more selective in who they contract with? Do you see that actually occurring?
Yeah, our hope is definitely that our data will be used to drive sourcing decisions, and that suppliers with better results will get more business. We hope that our data can be a basis to reward suppliers that are performing better and have better working conditions, and that by crowdsourcing this information from a large part of the workforce, that companies are able to get better data to feel confident in making those decisions. Because I think some of the information that they get from audits today, it's not always reliable, and they know that, and so they're not necessarily using it to drive sourcing decisions. But my hope is that when we are able to get them more reliable data, that they can use it to channel business to those better performing suppliers, because it's a lower risk for the company too. I mean, no company wants to end up on the front page of the New York Times, with the blood of 1,100 workers on their hands, and the terrible PR that comes along with that as well. Yeah.
How do you tackle the huge language barrier from country to country? Do you hire a new person every time?
Yep, in every country we operate, we have local trainers that speak the language when they go to the factory and they're doing training with workers. And then the advantage of using a voice-based platform is that we can run it in any language. So that was another limitation of SMS that I didn't mention, is that in India, for example, there's 22 national languages, and not all of those fonts and characters are on people's phones. So even if we could translate it into Telugu, wouldn't necessarily show up right on people's phones. So yeah, we do it all in local language, and sometimes we're running it in multiple languages in a single workplace if there's not one dominant language that everybody speaks. Yeah.
With social entrepreneurship, I think a big topic that comes up is
how much to kind of give back and how much to retain. You know, it's for kind of like every dollar that you were to increase in terms of, for example, rewards to people who answered the survey, that's a benefit to them, but it's a dollar less that you have for resources for other things. Maybe that's not like a perfect example of my point, but my question is, one, kind of, you chose to do a nonprofit instead of an actual for-profit company to do this. Can you explain how you think about that decision? And two, how do you balance the social benefit nature with the need to also earn money for resources? And
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Yeah, the reason that we chose to be a nonprofit rather than a for-profit is we felt that our customers would trust us and that workers would trust us more with their sensitive data. You know, we want to be able to say, and you know, we're in a transitional phase right now with tax structures of different organizations. Now there's B Corps, and people are starting to like sort of fill in the middle of the spectrum. And it's not just like, oh, if you're a for-profit, you're evil, and if you're a nonprofit, you're, you know, representing something good. But we felt that because we're in this realm of dealing with sensitive data on working conditions, that we could build trust more easily as a nonprofit. That said, we operate completely like a business in the sense of LaborLink is an earned income model. Companies pay us for the service to collect the data and analyze it, and then we're able to subsidize that with donor funding for, like I mentioned, the educational aspect of pushing information to workers. Some of that companies are not always willing to pay for. Or, for example, we're looking into peer information sharing among workers, and whether we could even do like mini broadcasts through their phones and use mobile like radio. We have a partner that's doing that in India. So we're looking at how do we promote information sharing among workers, and that's something that, you know, companies are not necessarily going to pay for, but we can get donor funding to subsidize that. So 2012 was the first year that we earned income on LaborLink, and it was 8% of our total budget, but last year we were up to 30%. We're trying to get a 50-50 split this year, and on track for 70% next year. And one of the reasons that we've been pretty aggressive about financial sustainability is that a lot of our seed funding came from Silicon Valley corporate and family foundations who are really interested in seeing that financial sustainability as quickly as possible. So it's kept us, you know, it's held that accountability mechanism to us and helped us sort of run a tight ship. Yeah.
You mentioned you did something with fair trade. Is it before? So is there a trend for this company to certify like good labor practices across other companies?
Yeah, so far we've done a lot of surveys in fair trade supply chains, more around assessing the impact of fair trade than collecting information towards their certification decisions per se, but I see a real opportunity not only in fair trade but for all types of certification that we're sort of transforming the whole model from one that's top down where standards are set you know, here or somewhere in Europe, to one that workers themselves feed into what is material for them and what's important in their lives, and kind of having a voice and a vote into that system, and getting that regular feedback. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for us to use LaborLink in ethical sourcing and fair trade specifically. But yeah, we are already doing some work in Uganda and a lot in Latin America. And we just did a survey with a tea plantation in India as well that's fair trade certified. Yeah.
Is your annual report on your website?
We do not have an annual report. Our 990 is on the is on GuideStar and I think Network for Good. Yeah. Yes.
So you've been so generous in sharing kind of your pivots and looking at different things. I'm just kind of curious. How do you think about, I mean, what comes next for you? How do you think about if you need to pivot career-wise? I'm not talking about Goodwill Solutions, but Heather.
Yeah, I mean, I still am attracted by the opportunity to use the power and resources of companies for social good. And, you know, if I had an opportunity at some future point in my career to, you know, say run a foundation or corporate social responsibility department at a company, or even a strategy team that was, you know, something like the Disney example that I gave, you know, to be able to drive strategy for a company, channeling their resources to social good, I would love to do that.
All right, so I think we're running towards the end of the time now. But first of all, thanks for bringing the whole social entrepreneurship angle to the lecture series. And I think anyone who has further questions, or you want to talk about the internships and so forth, you know, why don't you come up afterwards. All right, thank you.
Thank you.